Welcome in, everybody. Ready to climb some towers.
Ha ha. Always up for a challenge, especially when it involves deciphering a company as interesting as Indus Towers.
Well, strap in, because today's deep dive takes us right into their FY24 integrated report. We're talking Indian telecom infrastructure, the backbone behind that smartphone you're probably using to listen right now.
It's funny how that works, right? We carry around these incredibly powerful devices, but rarely think about what makes them tick.
Exactly. It's like we take the entire network for granted, out of sight, out of mind, until that dreaded no-signal icon pops up.
And that's where a company like Indus Towers comes in. They're the silent giants, the ones ensuring those bars stay strong.
Right. So for those who haven't dug through this report with us, give us the rundown. What exactly is Indus Towers?
Imagine the telecom world as a giant concert, right? Indus Towers, they're not the band on stage. They're the ones who built the stage, set up the speakers, the lights, everything. They provide the physical infrastructure, those towers we keep mentioning, that companies like Airtel and Jio use to actually broadcast their signals.
They're like the landlords of the telecom world, but on a massive scale. We're talking over 200,000 towers across all 18 of India's telecom circles.
And they're not slowing down. This report highlights the sheer scale of their growth. They've added a staggering number of towers this year alone, something like 3.5 times what they started with.
That's insane.
Wow.
But even with all that growth, they mentioned a dip in average revenue per tower. Are operators tightening their belts?
It's possible. Remember, Indian telecom is crazy competitive. Maybe operators are looking at building their own towers or joining forces to negotiate better deals. It's definitely something to keep an eye on.
So growth, but with a hint of uncertainty on the financial side. Then we've got 5G exploding onto the scene. Indus Towers is right in the middle of that tech revolution.
This report actually dedicates a good chunk to their role in India's 5G rollout. And it's not just about slapping some new antennas on existing towers. 5G needs a much denser network, with technology spread out way more, closer to users.
So are we saying goodbye to those iconic macro towers then?
Not quite, but the landscape is definitely changing. We'll be seeing a lot more small cells in-building solutions, almost like telecom infrastructure is weaving itself into the very fabric of our cities.
Talk about a logistical challenge. But hey, this is a company that built a tower at Siachen Base Camp, right? One of the highest battlefields in the world.
Right. It's a testament to their reach, for sure, how they're pushing to connect every corner of India, even the most extreme ones.
It's mind-blowing. But then, back down at ground level, they're dealing with a whole different challenge, public concern about EMF radiation from these towers. They actually address it directly in the report.
It's a tricky one, for sure. Even with all the safety standards and scientific evidence, that fear persists. It's not something Indus Towers can just ignore.
It seems like transparency and communication are key here.
Absolutely, and the report hints at that. Community engagement, being upfront about the science, it's about building trust, which honestly can be a lot harder than building towers.
Speaking of building, one thing that jumped out was how much they emphasized their people in this report.
Right. It's not just about numbers. It's about their well-being, diversity, the training programs they offer. It's clear they're investing in their workforce.
Which makes sense when you think about it.
Mm.
In this industry, things move so fast. Having a skilled and motivated team is essential.
Absolutely. And with all the changes happening in Indian telecom, that's more crucial now than ever before.
Speaking of changes, let's talk about that new legislation, the Telecommunications Act of 2023.
Now, that has the potential to be a real game changer. And the report actually dives into how it could impact the entire industry, especially for companies like Indus Towers.
So, less red tape, faster tower deployments.
Potentially, yes. But there's always another side to the coin.
What do you mean?
Well, think about it. The Act designates telecom infrastructure as critical, which means more scrutiny, greater accountability. Security, both physical and cyber, becomes absolutely paramount. Any downtime could have huge consequences.
So higher stakes, but higher rewards too, I imagine.
Exactly. It's a whole new ballgame. And speaking of high stakes, did you catch that part about industry consolidation? That acquisition of ATC India by Data Infrastructure Trust.
Oh yeah, huge deal. How does a company like Indus Towers, even with all its experience and reach, navigate a landscape that's shifting that much?
That's the million-dollar question. And this report, with all its details and insights, gives us a pretty good starting point.
All right, well, before we get ahead of ourselves, where were we? Oh, right, that whole thing about Indus Towers' reach, about them going above and beyond.
Right, this report actually tucks in a perfect example. They mention having a tower at Siachen Base Camp.
Wait, Siachen, you mean the glacier? At Siachen, the highest battlefield in the world.
The one and only.
Seriously.
How
I mean, just imagine the logistics, the weather up there. It really shows how dedicated they are to getting coverage everywhere, no matter how crazy the conditions.
It's a wild example for sure. But it also highlights the contrast because back down at sea level, there's a whole different challenge they're tackling, that EMF thing we touched on.
Right, that disconnect between the actual safety standards and what the public is worried about. It's something the whole industry is dealing with.
And to their credit, this report doesn't shy away from it. They acknowledge those fears, even if they're based on, well, misunderstandings about EMF. It's not enough to have science on your side. You got to deal with how people feel, the worry.
How do you bridge that gap, though? It feels as much about communication as it does about the technical stuff.
Exactly. And the report kind of hints at their strategy transparency, getting communities involved, maybe even getting independent experts to do checks. It's trust building more than tower building in a way.
Speaking of building, one thing I noticed was how much emphasis they put on their employees in this report. It wasn't just the usual HR stuff.
Right. They're talking about well-being, diversity, all the training programs they have. It's like they're really putting their money where their mouth is when it comes to investing in their workforce.
Which, when you think about the pace of this industry, makes sense.
Right.
Having a team that's skilled and motivated is everything.
Absolutely. And with everything changing in Indian telecom, it's even more important now.
And speaking of change, can we circle back to the Telecommunications Act of 2023? That thing's got the potential to rewrite the rulebook.
No kidding. And the report actually goes into detail about how it could impact everything, especially for a company like Indus Towers.
We were talking earlier about how it could streamline things, speed up deployments.
Right. But like I said, there's always two sides to every coin.
Meaning,
Well, think about what it means when the Act labels telecom infrastructure as critical. More scrutiny, way more accountability. Security becomes a huge deal, both the physical kind and cybersecurity. Any downtime, and it's not just customers who are impacted, it could be essential services too.
so higher stakes all around, but probably bigger rewards too if they play their cards right.
Exactly. The game's changed. And on that note, remember that whole discussion about industry consolidation,
Mm.
that ATC India acquisition by Data Infrastructure Trust? That's a prime example.
Massive shift in the landscape. How does a company like Indus Towers, even with all their experience, deal with that kind of upheaval?
$1 million question. And luckily, this report gives us some clues. They're not shying away from the challenges market share, keeping clients happy when competitors are circling.
It's a reminder that even the big players can't just coast on their reputation. They got to keep adapting.
Exactly. And it's not just about competition within the industry either. One thing the report highlighted that I hadn't really considered was natural disasters.
Interesting. You think of these towers as being so sturdy, but obviously extreme weather, which is happening more and more these days, that's got to be a concern.
Right. And they seem to be taking it seriously, talking about business continuity plans, disaster recovery. It's a whole other angle on building for the future.
It makes you think about sustainability differently too. It's not just about being eco-friendly, it's about making sure your whole operation can survive whatever's thrown at it.
And they're making moves on the environmental front, too. They talk about reducing their carbon footprint, using renewable energy, even promoting a circular economy within their own operations.
It's good to see they're connecting the dots, seeing how sustainability isn't just nice to have, it's good business sense.
Totally. And it's not just about the environment either. There's a really interesting case study in here about their partnership with the Energy and Resources Institute.
Oh yeah, what are they doing?
They're providing these hybrid solar charging units to weaver communities in Uttar Pradesh and Madhya Pradesh. It's a cool example of how they can take their tech, their infrastructure, and address wider social needs.
It's a win-win. The weavers get reliable, clean energy, which is crucial for their work, and Indus Towers gets to walk the walk on corporate social responsibility.
Exactly. It shows that success these days isn't just about profits, it's about the positive impact you have on everyone involved.
100%. They're not just building towers, they're building a future. And it sounds like they're putting a lot of thought into it. But wow, we've covered a ton of ground here. Where does this deep dive go from here? It's like we've zoomed in from those massive towers all the way down to the individual connections, the impact on people's lives.
It's all connected, right? And this report really drives that home. But if we're talking big picture takeaways, it really boils down to one word: data.
Data as in the sheer amount of it we're using.
Exactly. The streaming, the scrolling, the video calls, it's mind-boggling, and it's only going to explode more. And all of that, it relies on this invisible infrastructure that companies like Indus Towers are building.
And with 5G becoming more mainstream, that data explosion is going to be even bigger, right?
Think of it this way. 5G isn't just a faster network. It's like upgrading from a garden hose to a fire hydrant. You need a way bigger pipe to handle all that data.
So more towers then.
Not just more, but different. Denser networks, technology closer to the users. Macro towers are still important, but get ready for a lot more small cells, in-building solutions, almost like this hidden network woven into our cities.
So it's not just about building bigger, it's about building smarter.
Which brings us right back to that industry consolidation we discussed, those mergers, those acquisitions. It's about creating companies with the resources to actually pull off these next-gen networks.
Makes you wonder, though, if having fewer big players could stifle innovation down the line.
It's a valid point, and that's why it's more crucial than ever for companies like Indus Towers to stay agile, to really understand their customers' needs, because ultimately they're the ones driving all this data demand.
It's a tough needle to thread, staying competitive while also working together to build a network that can handle the future.
And don't forget all those other pressures, public perception of EMF, the climate change risks.
Right, it's not like they can just focus on the tech and call it a day.
Exactly. And that's where sustainability comes in. It's not just a PR move anymore. It's core to their strategy.
And they seem to be walking the walk, not just talking about it. The renewable energy investments, the circular economy stuff, it all adds up.
Because let's be real, doing good for the planet is good for business in the long run.
And they're not stopping there. That partnership with the Energy and Resources Institute, talk about impact.
Right. Bringing solar power to those weaver communities. It's a perfect example of how they can use their expertise to make a real difference.
These shows are thinking about the bigger picture, about creating value for everybody, not just shareholders.
It's a more holistic way of looking at success, and based on this report, Indus Towers gets it.
Well, there you have it. We started by climbing those massive telecom towers, and somehow we ended up talking about the future of data, sustainability, even empowering local communities.
Because that's what's so fascinating about a company like Indus Towers. They're not just building infrastructure, they're building a future, and this report gives us a glimpse into how they're doing it.
It's a future that affects all of us, whether we realize it or not. So, next time you're streaming your favorite show or scrolling through social media, take a second to think about that invisible network that makes it all possible.
It's a network that's only going to become more crucial as we move further into this digital world.
Absolutely. Well, on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive. Thanks for joining us as we explore the fascinating world of Indus Towers and Indian telecom. Until next time.